It's a great honor for me to be here at the Empire Club of Canada today, which is arguably the most famous and historically relevant speakers podium to have ever existed in Canada. It has offered its podium to such international luminaries as Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Audrey Hepburn, the Dalai Lama, Indira Gandhi, and closer to home, from Pierre Trudeau to Justin Trudeau. Literally generations of our great nation's leaders, alongside with those of the world's top international diplomats, heads of state, and business and thought leaders.
It is a real honor and a distinct privilege to be invited to speak to the Empire Club of Canada, which has been welcoming international diplomats, leaders in business and in science and in politics. When they stand at that podium, they speak not only to the entire country, but they can speak to the entire world.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 117th season of the Empire Club of Canada. My name is Antoinette Tumilo, and I am the president of the Empire Club of Canada and your host for today's virtual event on Canada's tourism industry, the impact and recovery for 2020 and beyond, featuring Scott Beck, Ross Jefferson, Beth Porter, Marsha Walden, and moderator Vanmala Subramaniam. I now call this meeting to order. Now, before we begin today, I have a few logistical items to let you know of. If you're finding your internet feed is slow, please see below and click the Switch Streams button. There's also a request for help button available to you if you are experiencing technical difficulties. I want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who generously support the Empire Club and make these events possible. Thank you to our supporting sponsor today, Spirits Canada, and our season sponsors, Canadian Bankers Association and Waste Connections Canada. I also want to thank our event partner, VBC Communications and LiveMeeting.ca, Canada's online event space for webcasting today's event. We are here today to talk about the state of our tourism industry, an industry that touches many of us and has been the hardest hit by COVID-19. As a $105 billion sector accounting for 2% of Canada's GDP, the restrictions and economic impacts presented by the pandemic affect three types of travel. Number one, domestic travel, our ability to discover our own country and visit friends and family who live in other parts of the country. Number two, business travel, attracting conventions and meetings to Canada. And three, international travel, Canada's ability to host visitors from around the world. The US accounts for the majority of international visitors to Canada, followed by China. It is a dynamic and vastly diverse industry comprised of innovative businesses in every region of the country. The travel supply chain involves many small and medium-sized businesses involving accommodations, transportation, attractions, and the food and beverage hospitality sector. Canadians are being encouraged to discover their own backyard in 2020. Yet the fear of COVID-19, despite the regulation of safety protocols in public-facing businesses, is influencing our behavior, as are the restrictions around inter-provincial border crossings. Safe mobility for travelers is a priority for successful recovery as we continue to battle the virus over the coming months and into 2021. And now, let me briefly introduce to you our panel. Scott Beck, President and Chief Executive Officer, Destination Toronto. He's a champion of the visitor economy and a proven leader in the destination sales and marketing industry. He spent 14 years as the president and CEO of Visit Salt Lake in Salt Lake City, Utah. He served on the executive committee of Destinations International for 6 years and as the organization's international board chair from 2014 to 2015. Ross Jefferson, President and Chief Executive Officer, Discover Halifax. Discover Halifax is the regional destination marketing organization responsible for overseeing the growth of the tourism economy in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Ross has an executive MPA from the Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario and holds the ICD.D designation from the Institute of Corporate Directors. He also recently served as board director with the Canadian Automobile Association and the Destination Marketing Association of Canada. Beth Potter, President and Chief Executive Officer, Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. She leads the advocacy efforts for the tourism industry in Ontario by promoting the importance of tourism as an economic driver and job creator for Ontario. Beth is a recognized leader with more than 25 years of experience in the not-for-profit and tourism sectors. She has worked with a variety of boards and committees and volunteers across the tourism industry. Marsha Walden, President and CEO of Destination Canada. Through her career, she has held leadership roles in strategy and organizational renewal, marketing and communication, social responsibility, operations management, and business innovation. She joined Destination British Columbia as President and CEO in 2013 and led the newly formed Provincial Crown Corporation to create groundbreaking strategies for tourism development and nationally recognized data-driven performance marketing. And most recently, on August 18th, Marsha was appointed by the Honorable Mélanie Joly, Federal Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, to the position of President and CEO of Destination Canada. Congratulations, Marsha, on your recent appointment. This panel will be moderated by Vanmala Subramaniam. She's a business reporter with The Logic, focusing on Canada's tech sector and innovation economy. She's a business journalist with over a decade of reporting across Canadian media. And she previously worked at Financial Post, where she covered the cannabis industry. She has traveled the world producing investigative documentaries. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind everyone on this call that this is an interactive event. We encourage you to take advantage of the question box to the right of your screen and let us know what is on your mind and if you have any questions for our panelists. Vanmala, over to you.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here. I think this will be an excellent discussion. So I think I'm just going to start with Marsha. I really want to, just so everyone is on the same page, I really want to get a sense from you, Marsha, as to what are maybe the 2 to 3 biggest trends that you saw in the last 6 months that impacted the tourism sector in Canada. Just, you know, just so we're all anchored and we know what we're talking about. And I think that'll be a good place to start.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Vanmala, and good afternoon, everyone. I think maybe a good starting place is just to get a feel for how the industry impacts Canada. And as Antoinette said, this is a $105 billion industry and a significant contributor to our overall economy. But it's kind of hard to get a sense of that, I think, when you're talking dollars. And more importantly, this is 2.2 million jobs in our country, about 740,000 of which are direct jobs. So when we're talking about impacts, I think it's really critical to think about, you know, what is the human impact of some of the numbers that I'm going to be talking about today. And there's really no way of characterizing what's going on in our industry or has gone on over the course of this crisis, other than it has been completely devastating for the tourism industry. We're talking about an industry that for the 5 years prior was on an incredible growth spurt, a high growth, high performance industry that was outperforming Canada's GDP by almost double every year. And it has been brought to its knees in the space of just 6 months. And just to give you a few data points to characterize just the level of impact that we see in our industry that I think few others could say they're anywhere near. Consider that the airline revenues, not just the big players, but airlines right across our country, regional players as well, are down 95%. Accommodation, down 82%. The business events and meetings side of our business, down 87%. And festivals and events, which enhance, the quality of life for every community in this country, down 100%. So those are the sorts of impacts that have an immediate toll, of course, on businesses everywhere and on the human side of those businesses, which are the employees right across the country.
Right. No, that's it's clearly decimated the sector. Scott, I want to focus on you because I want to talk a little bit about Toronto. Can you kind of differentiate or maybe characterize to us how the city coped with the impact when we were in full lockdown mode in April, May, and when we started opening up? And I ask this question because Toronto is a big destination for business travel. So I want to know if there has been actually a big change in terms of movement of people spending in the city, people coming in and, tourist dollars coming into that city. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Thank you. And also thanks to the Empire Club for bringing our industry to this podium. It's very welcome. So a lot like Marsha said, during the lockdown, it's complete shut off, as it was for many industries. But again, I think we characterize our industry as the hardest hit, and not just internally. That's how it's viewed. So I think to make it sort of oversimplified, Toronto has three major markets. We have the traditional leisure tourism that people expect as part of any sort of big urban environment. But the other two markets are more impactful, and for a city like Toronto, where really the travel comes from, and that is our business events. So conventions, meetings, events, those are absolutely foundational to our tourism economy. And then is the business travel, that corporate travel that is just part of our economy, but also so much a part of who our community is. So, those three markets, then you overlay the fact that 48% of our visitors are international. And again, this is not just leisure international. This is business events, professional societies, corporate travel from the US, from Europe. So as we were in the lockdown, all of those were shut off. And then as we opened, two of those three markets were also shut off. Business events were, as Marsha noted, were 87% down, or that's pretty much non-existent. And then also corporate transient travel has really been curtailed, if not turned off. So as we came out of it, we were really dependent on hyperlocal and drive traffic, which in a metro area like Toronto is important, but it is really not significant in terms of how our industry has functioned in the past. So, that sort of perfect storm of those three segments all being impacted dramatically has made it tough. And to put it in perspective, you have, rural areas in our province that are operating between maybe 60 and 70% occupancy on the weekends, and we're still hovering around 13% occupancy in the downtown core of Toronto. So it is still very, very impactful to us.
Ross, Halifax and the Atlantic provinces chose a completely different route where they formed this sort of bubble. Could you just maybe talk to me a little bit about how that bubble strategy has worked for the East Coast, Halifax in particular?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the bubble consisting of the four Atlantic provinces was put in place at July 1st. I think our entire industry agrees that the best economic strategy is actually to keep the curve flattened. And, this is sometimes being presented as an and/or, and I think the industry really wants to convey that it's not an and/or. I think that these things can coexist. It just has to be managed very carefully. The question really for the Atlantic bubble is, what is that goal specifically? And we don't have that specifically defined. Look, the public is certainly supportive of keeping the bubble closed here in Atlantic Canada. We've got one of the lowest rates of support for travel from outside of our bubble. 76% of Atlantic Canadians want to keep the bubble closed. And we know that public opinion matters and it influences policy. Now, if you were to ask our industry, what's our industry's take on this? I think right now you kind of get a bit of a mixed review from even our own industry. I mean, some businesses are more dependent on markets outside of the bubble, and others have been less so, or they've had the ability to adapt. And with hindsight right now, we can see that there are some advantages of the bubble. With our borders closed, certainly our markets have shrunk, but alternatives for travel for people from within inside the bubble has also shrunk. So it's a smaller piece of pie, but we're getting, I guess, the greater share of that. The reality now, though, I think, is that it's not about competition with other destinations. It's really about competition for non-tourism alternatives. So, we do think that right now it's critical that events, programming, activities, those types of things are key to our competition to have people still traveling with inside the bubble. So, one of the strong potential advantages of the bubble, or should I say, having virtual zero cases, is that the restriction of movement inside our bubble is certainly being relaxed quite significantly. And we're starting to see the ability to do things in this bubble that we couldn't before. We can now host 2,000 people in our Scotiabank Centre. We're seeing the return of Quebec Major Junior Hockey, other professional sports teams coming back and about to play. We're seeing conferences return that are regional in nature with up to 200 in size. We're working on strategies to increase that. But perhaps more importantly, people within the bubble are starting to feel more safe to travel. We have one of the highest safety beliefs in support of travel, interprovincial in the bubble at 88%. So, look, I think that the jury's still out as to whether this was the right strategy, the wrong strategy. There's definitely winners and losers. But, I think ultimately the long-term sustainability of maintaining a bubble doesn't make sense. We've got to be opening up to safe markets when it's appropriate. And I think that's the key to the recovery for our industry nationally and globally.
Beth, I'm going to now direct this question to you, jumping off on what Ross just said. Do you think that this bubble strategy necessarily only works maybe in places that are less dense, and it would be hard to actually implement this in provinces like Ontario and Quebec, especially now when we see the cases rise? You're muted, Beth.
I wasn't going to do that.
That's okay. We're all going to do it.
Yeah. I think that bubble would be very difficult. We've already seen over the past 6 months challenges with people moving around our own province, and because of the geographic differences in our province and because it's so big, there's been some resident resentment towards people from outside their local area coming in. And it comes back to not just a fear of the virus itself, but it comes back to can our healthcare system manage an outbreak if it were to happen in our local community? And so that's certainly been an underlying issue. But it's important to remind residents that tourism is part of our cultural fabric here in Canada. And so, Ross mentioned, the junior hockey tournaments. For a lot of rural Ontario, junior hockey tournaments are a huge part of their tourism industry. And the ripple effect, if they don't come, means that restaurants and grocery stores and hotels and gas stations don't see the revenue from those events either. And so there's an underlying ripple effect that we have to take into consideration. Tourism is an important part of the local economy, regardless of how small or how big your economy is.
That's interesting. I actually, I want to open this up and direct this question to, I guess, all of you. I think in our previous pre-panel discussion, we really got into the balance between government policies and, the economic impact of tourism. So maybe I can ask all of you, at what point did you think that certain government policies or just the approach we've taken to the virus has been too much of an overreach in terms of the impact it's had on, the cities that and the tourism sectors in urban Canada, rural Canada? Marsha, maybe I can start with you.
Commenting on government policy probably isn't the best place to put me right now, Vanmala. I will say that certainly from the perspective of our industry, what we are hearing from organizations like Beth's and the Tourism Industry Association of Canada is that for our industry to have any hope of recovery in the next 12 to 18 months, there needs to be more of a domestic view of our country as opposed to a province by province take on how to manage our healthcare. And we are seeing examples around the world of more of a nationalistic approach rather than I guess a more compartmentalized provincial and territorial approach. And countries like, large ones like China and smaller ones like New Zealand have really tried to manage it as a country as opposed to individual provinces and states for the most part. So perhaps I'll let Beth pile on to that one.
Please, Beth, go ahead.
Exactly. I mean, this is not, in order to create a seamless travel experience for the traveler, we need to be lined up all together. Tourism is a global industry, regardless if you're traveling for leisure or for business. Tourism is a global industry. And so we need to make sure that not only is Ontario working with the other provinces, but nationally we're working with other countries so that when a traveler is going from point A to point B, from country A to country B, the experience is the same. They know what to expect. They know how to plan, and they know what to expect on the other end should a positive test case come up. So contact tracing, testing, so incredibly important. And we've been working, globally with the World Travel and Tourism Council and countries around the world to try and make that happen. We're very, very excited last week to see and hear that 9 countries in the European Union have come together and started working collaboratively on this. And that's a really important step, and it's one that Canada is going to have to make soon.
On that note, actually, Beth, I thought about something. So if we properly implement contact tracing and, rapid testing kits so that everyone gets tested before they board a plane, things like when they enter a new country, how do you then overcome the fear people have of, I guess, being in close proximity to each other for a long period of time, say on a plane? Because I think that's part of the reason why you're also seeing bookings down and planes not being able to take off because there are too few people wanting to travel. And Scott, maybe you could jump in here if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of it is messaging, and I think a lot of it comes back to messaging from the government. And I want to recognize that public safety is hard. It is a difficult proposition. But I'll call out one example where I think we could have a better process for sharing information. We highlight the number of cases on an airplane that lands at Toronto Pearson Airport with a number of COVID cases that were tested on the airplane. There is no record of a transmission of the virus on an airplane. Airplanes have filtration systems. So that person that boarded the plane had the virus. They didn't get the virus on the plane. And so this idea that the airplane could be a potential way to spread the virus is not accurate. It's just there is not a documented case of a transmission on an airline or on an airplane, excuse me. And so I think that type of messaging, when they say this is how many people were on this flight that landed with COVID, continually perpetuates this idea that it was on the airline that someone got that, or that the opportunity is there for you to get the virus on an airplane. And some of that type of communication, I think, is where we've got to find a better way to share information that is public safety in its orientation, but also has a better way to explain the impact.
Ross, would you agree with that? Is the way in which we're communicating these directives to people about travel, could it be done better, I guess?
Well, yeah, and again, I would echo what Scott said, that I certainly wouldn't want to be in the position of setting all the rules and doing all this. It's an incredible job to be doing, but I do think that we have done an incredible job of communicating the risks across this entire country associated with this, and we've scared people, and rightfully so. But I think that within that context, there are some things that are disproportionately, I think, perceived to be higher risk. And I think traveling on planes is an example. I think that it is people's close proximity to one another and not respecting the rules that are in place of social distancing and wearing masks and those types of things that is probably the greater opportunity for us to focus on. And I think we know the travel industry has been hit hard from this, but the element of travel does not cause the virus to happen. It's almost like there's a perception that if you travel, it causes it. It is the close contact of people that spread it, and I think it's a miss. I don't think we're communicating quite effectively there.
If I could just jump in as well.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
There needs to be an onus of responsibility on the traveler as well to follow the rules, to respect the jurisdiction that you're visiting, whether it's your own community, the community next door, or another jurisdiction farther away, but to continue to wear your mask, to continue to follow hand cleanliness and sanitization rules. Those are really important, and we have to put some of that responsibility onto the traveler to make sure that they are in fact following those rules in order to help mitigate any potential spread that could happen, not on the plane, not in the car, not in the hotel room, but when they're mixing and mingling with other people.
I think, Vanmala, we've been sort of trying to socialize this idea that businesses don't transmit the virus, people do, and there's a personal code of conduct that I think is also one of the reasons why Canada has managed this so much better than some other countries. Is there is a personal responsibility ethos here that is part of what Canada is, and I think that helps us. But that really is sort of absent from the messaging.
I think I would just add quickly onto that when we were contemplating opening up the bubble, our own individual provinces were locked down and opening up the bubble to the fore, there was a lot of resistance back then that travel would cause the virus, and we've now been open since July 1st, and it's not. And I think the question really is, perhaps in this context, is who are you opening up to in that particular case? But if you're opening up to a market that has the same per capita or number of active cases, you're not increasing your risk or your odds, and I think that's lost right now in all of the numbers that are constantly being quoted in the media right now.
Okay, we're getting a couple of. Sorry to just interrupt you, Marsha. We're getting quite a few questions from the audience, so I just want to move on very quickly to one thing I think that everyone's interested in, which is we have definitely seen a rise in the number of people choosing to travel locally because they don't have a choice. And so I wanted to ask you, Marsha, how much does that increase in local travel actually make up for the loss in international tourism? Does it even make up for the loss in international travel?
Well, there's a couple of things to think about. The domestic market, so within Canada, is incredibly important to the leisure tourism side and the business traveler side. So the ability to travel for a business meeting within our country is a huge contributor to overall revenue. So if we think about the domestic marketplace versus the international, the domestic market actually is worth about twice as much as our international market in total. Now, that doesn't say that the individual traveler, normally an individual traveler from an international market, has more value as a guest than a domestic traveler. They just spend more money. That's all there is to it. But the volume relative to the domestic traveler is significantly different. So, for our industry to be able to support domestic travel is a great starting point to getting back on the road to recovery. But ultimately, the ability to open our international borders is the only thing that can take us over the line into a more profitable existence once again. But there's some markets that are very valuable, like the US market, for instance. It's worth 10 times any other market that we have from a leisure travel perspective. And so that would be certainly the one that we as an industry primarily focus on. And many businesses are built on the backs of a very strong American client base, for instance, that are 100% devoted to international markets. So I think for us, the key, it's very unlikely our international borders would open before our provincial ones do. So I think for our industry, really getting the opportunity to cultivate our domestic audience, having a national strategy around things like that would be extremely helpful in the short term.
And you mentioned the U.S. border, which was going to be my next question. Scott, maybe you could weigh in here. How would we open the U.S. border to travel in a prudent way, in a safe way, given what's going on there and the way they are handling the virus? Is there even a way to do that?
Wow. I'm usually not one that shies away from tough subjects, so I'll jump in and have Beth rescue me if I get too far out. Contact tracing, rapid testing, being cognizant of the health and safety protocols that people are asked to do. Clearly, there has to be a change in the way that the U.S. is managing the virus. I mean, first and foremost, that's got to happen. But I think if you look at inspiration from other countries or other places, there are ways to manage this, and there are ways to mitigate significant risk. And I think starting again, contact tracing, rapid testing, protocols that Beth advocated for early on, which are, it is not, the province of Ontario is doing it differently than the province of British Columbia. That's going to be really important that there's a national strategy to do this, because that's where we're really going to have an impact. But I think it is something that is vital. I mean, it's really important to our market to have that visitor, not just because of what they bring, but because of what we are as the North America's second largest tech community, as North America's second largest financial center. Those are things that require a dependence on the U.S. market to keep those positions. So it is also in our necessary for us to do that, as Marsha also indicated. But I think the way to do it, I mean, Beth, help me out here, is that it's got to start with a national strategy. It's got to involve contact tracing, rapid testing, and a change in sort of the way we manage the quarantine requirements.
Absolutely. Everything that we're seeing around the world, that's where they're making headway. The rule of thumb seems to be right now, testing 72 hours ahead of time, and having that documentation with you, not only when you're leaving the country, but also on arrival and in the new country, and then to be able to manage that data collection. So there is a technology part of this that also needs to be managed, because we need to integrate basically a health system of testing with a travel system that crosses over platforms from one mode of transportation to another, and through the border security agencies as well. So there's a big technology issue that's behind this as well. But in the interim, there's some easy ways to get that testing and contact tracing in place.
I actually just want to, I think quite a few people are curious about, all of your thoughts on this. To what extent do you think the quarantine requirements of 14 days are really inhibiting people being able to come into this country? And I am also referring to Canadian citizens abroad coming back just for the upcoming Christmas season. Maybe talk to me about what we might see there given the 14-day quarantine. Scott, do you want to go?
Well, it's a big deterrent, clearly. So I think the way I would address that is there's no alternative to travel. There's an inevitability of our recovery. I would like to start by saying there's an inevitability to our recovery. I mean, it really is going to recover. There is no alternative for travel. And so that also is what makes this so hard right now, is face-to-face interaction for, whatever that is, for a business interaction, for education, for certification, for all those things is very, very important. And if you're going to want to go someplace for a business trip and that one-day business trip becomes a 15-day experience, you're not going to travel. If that conference that you're attending to share best practices and learn from your peers, a 3-day conference, becomes a 17-day experience, that's not going to happen. And that's where it is the biggest detriment. So, and shortening that through contact tracing and better testing, all those things that can shorten that quarantine time would absolutely benefit our industry and would benefit that transfer of knowledge that is, again, inevitable in travel.
Yeah, and there's a social component to it as well. People have been separated from their families, from their loved ones, for a long time. I personally haven't seen my daughter since February. Do I want her to come home at Christmas? Absolutely. So there's that need to connect with your family and loved ones. And so people are going to they're going to try and figure out a way around it. And we've already seen heard some kind of anecdotally negative stories about, people arriving, checking into hotels, and then not staying because they don't want to quarantine. If we can do the contact tracing and the testing, we can eliminate that and we can make everybody good citizens again.
Sorry, I'm muted this time. I actually I have one more question left, and then we're getting a lot of audience questions, so I'm going to move on to the Q&A from the audience. So the one question I had, and maybe Ross, you can start, is the government has been pumping in quite a bit of money, although definitely not sufficient, into the tourism industry, almost $1 billion to help travel and tourist related businesses, in addition to, the wage subsidy that directly helps businesses. So I guess I want to know, Ross, what have you been hearing from, local businesses and how much that has helped them and how much they need that to continue until we have a vaccine and things are completely back to normal?
Yeah, absolutely. There has been obviously tremendous supports that have been put in place that have helped across all industries. The wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, there's a number of programs that we're all familiar with, and they've helped all businesses. We've also seen significant help that's been given for specific industries. And I also want to point out that region by region, province by province, there are also very different responses. I think, here in our regions in Atlantic Canada, I don't know if they would agree with that statement that the tourism industry specifically has had any, major material supports. And again, province by province, even within Atlantic Canada, there are different responses within that as well. Look, we know that the tourism industry is the industry that was hit first. It's hit the hardest, and it will be the last to recover. And I think the industry also really understands that although all of the measures required to try to flatten the curve are very directly aimed at this industry. We know it's not intentional. It is here to safeguard lives and to safeguard other businesses. And let's also just for a moment recognize there's a lot of wealth that is shifting around when this happens right now. There are a lot of winners happening right now with very many industries, very many different businesses and companies that are doing exceedingly well as individuals. And then there are people in the industry, people working in this industry that are bearing the significant costs. So I think that, as policy, understanding that we've got to intentionally curb or punish unintentionally this industry, being able to have that support, I think, is incredibly important.
I'm going to start moving on to audience questions. These aren't directed at anyone specifically, so anyone who wants to go ahead and answer, just pipe up. So, question from Rick Anderson: for those few bright spots where tourism has picked up, what are the effects CERB, the government policy, has had in bringing people back? And what are you hearing from operators as their second biggest concern? The first being revenue. Maybe we can start with the first part of that question, which is how has CERB helped in kind of bringing people back to consuming and just helping the tourism industry? If anyone wants to weigh in here.
I'll just say, CERB obviously has been a very important program, and has helped to ensure that there is still a way for people to put food on the table and to pay bills. Is it the right answer going forward? I think that the government of Canada is right now in the process of trying to look at what is the best solution for a longer run, simply because we don't know when this is going to end. Has it helped people get out and support their local restaurants? Absolutely, it has. It's definitely been a great program. From an industry that employs a lot of people, it's been very beneficial.
Scott or Ross, you might be best equipped to answer this. What are you hearing from operators as their second biggest concern after revenue?
Their ability to recover based on staffing, the availability of staffing. As you look at how hard, as Ross clearly articulated, it's hit the frontline workers in our industry, we will be the last to recover. And so there is a real risk, knowing how difficult our industry was experiencing pre-COVID in terms of unemployment rate and finding employees. I think that's what we're hearing from our industry, and where they're looking to a lot of leadership from the government to help protect the future workforce of our industry, because once the revenue model is starting to come back, we will need the staff. That is so intrinsic to our industry. The front desk agent that checks you in, the bellman that greets you when you're at the hotel, the server that delivers your bottle of wine, that human element of our industry is vital to our success, and one of the reasons we're such a great industry. But I think that's what we're hearing, is it is preservation of a future workforce, because we will be the last to recover.
I'll just add one last comment that I think, relative to other countries, I think Canada's done a really great job. I think there's lots more that needs to be done specifically for the industry. And, the speech from the throne was encouraging, and I know there's lots of work still continuing.
Vanmala,
Marsha, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I'd just like to, I think, put forward something that I know that Tourism Industry Association of Canada would have at the top of its list. And CERB certainly tries to address much of this, as do some of the other cost reduction mechanisms that the federal government and provincial and territorial have put in place. But the number one issue that we hear from industry is the need for liquidity. And having the ability to access what industry is calling patient operating capital is really, really critical for recovery. And you can imagine how difficult it would be as a business person to try to make a decision about taking on new debt without knowing whether or not your ability to repay that debt will start to occur in 18 months or 4 years or 5 years. That's an extremely difficult decision for a business to make, because no one knows how long this piece of string really is. But the need for liquidity, and the need for that liquidity to be patient in outwaiting this virus, is what I'm hearing from industry is the number one thing that they need.
Interesting. Here's a very interesting question from Joe. What are your thoughts on governments introducing domestic tourism stimulus programs? So I guess the idea being trying to incentivize people to travel locally by, either a tax rebate or something like that. Beth, you're nodding. Do you have thoughts on this?
Absolutely. We've actually put a proposal into the provincial government for a travel tax credit at the provincial level, and we are supporting TIAC in an ask at the federal level for a Canadian travel tax credit on domestic travel to help encourage Canadians and Ontarians to get, to spend their vacation dollars here at home. If we can reduce we've always had a travel deficit of people leaving the country, and if we can capture some of that revenue back here at home when the snowbirds can't cross the border, and we can and people are not choosing to go elsewhere in the world for their vacations, then wouldn't that be, we know that would be helpful, and would actually, we could almost recoup our losses if we could get the domestic market to spend all of their vacation dollars here at home. So travel tax credit, both at the provincial level and at the federal level, incredibly important.
Let me size that up for you for a moment, and thank you, Beth, for that. Canadians spend about $43 billion a year traveling outside of Canada, going to sun destinations in the winter and Europe in the summer, etc. The amount of revenue that we acquire here for inbound travelers, so international visitors coming to see us in Canada, is $22 billion, so about half. So the opportunity for us to get domestic travel stimulated in some way gives us at least a chance at acquiring some of that outbound money that would normally be spent somewhere else in the world. It's very unlikely that we could have a full substitution effect, but even if we could get 25%, capture 25% of that outbound revenue, it would be a huge boost to our industry.
That's thanks for that, Marsha. The next question I think is quite important and relevant. It's from Vicky, and any one of you can weigh in here. How can travelers find what the rules are for the destination that they are traveling to? This information is not easy to find. Can anyone on the panel make suggestions? I actually personally totally agree with Vicky here.
So we're working on that. And as an industry, we have been working collaboratively to develop protocols by which businesses are operating to ensure, a health and safety environment for consumers. And they're working very closely with, we've worked very closely with the Workplace Safety and Prevention Services organization here in Ontario, with our Ministry of Health, and of course with the public health authorities. And then to help educate the consumer on where they can go, we have been designated by WTTC to administer a safe travel stamp here in Canada. And so destinations and businesses were just in the process of getting people on board with this program, but they will be able to search the safe travel stamp. They will be able to see it on a business's website. They'll be able to search, businesses that have the safe travel stamp with us, and destinations like Toronto and others across the province, and now starting across the country, are starting to also use the stamp to denote to travelers that they are a safe destination.
Okay. Thanks.
I would echo
Scott,
that, Vanmala, is
yeah.
If you look at an organization like ours, and this is not meant as as an advertisement, but if you go to destinationtoronto.com, and I would say that a large portion of our industry is doing this, there's a COVID banner that pops up immediately, and there's a hyperlink text there that you can get to the sort of the Toronto public health information about how to travel. But I think one of the things that I've always tried to tell people is look at that point of your travel that's sort of the most impactful. So if you're staying overnight in a hotel, start with the hotel. And every hotel is going to pretty much have the same thing. And that's a really important place to start. And then you look at your modes of transportation. And the hard part about one central part is both the great thing about our industry and the difficult part about our industry in times like this is we are small businesses, and we are a patchwork of an incredibly interconnected sort of environment. And so I think look at those major points: airline, hotel, transportation, and then also the destination website in large measure will have sort of that public health from a city perspective or regional perspective that's very helpful. But having just traveled recently, staying at a hotel in Ottawa, checked the site. I knew I was going to have my temperature checked when I walked in. I knew what the protocols were for dining, what was available, what wasn't available, how I had to sort of my own personal responsibility when I was a guest of the hotel. All of that stuff was very, very clearly articulated at the hotel level.
Scott, actually, another question for you, since I have you on mute, is Michael is asking, how does Scott see things reopening next year? First hotels, followed by restaurants, followed by other attractions. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I would first and foremost like to reset the question. We're open. I would just, the other thing I would want to say is we are struggling with this messaging that somehow it's about a when. It's not about when, it's about how. So we're open. A large portion of our hotels have been open through the entire pandemic. Now, there's been no guests in the hotels. So I think it's going to start really how it started immediately after we went into stage 3. It's going to start hyper-local, and all of those services in our industry that have a hyper-local audience, restaurants, attractions, the zoos, the aquariums, those things that our locals do just as much as visitors do. And then as we start to grow the potential pool of visitors, again, interprovincial, national, then that audience grows. And so then hotels become more important, or see more traffic, airlines see more traffic. But the fact of the matter is we've been open. We just need to find better ways to communicate how to engage in our industry, because we are open for business. and we want to welcome people from London, Ontario. We want to welcome people, to come in our doors. So it's more about how than when. And I think it's going to start where the hyperlocal has the highest sort of impact in our businesses.
Okay, thanks for that, Scott. Ross, maybe I can have you answer this. A question from Leslie: what new innovations have you seen in the sectors as a result of adapting to COVID, and what things will stay post-COVID?
Oh, wow. Yeah. What a great question. Look, I think there's been a ton of innovations at every business level on how people interact with customers, how they take orders, so I think, that's all around us. I really love the question about, what's going to change in the future. And I think that there will be things that change in the future, but I think we also might be overstating in some cases the change in the future as well. So I think that there's a lot of theories out there that this will be the end of tourism, or certainly fundamentally change tourism. And while I think it's going to be a long time for us to get to full recovery, and a lot of consensus on that, the fundamentals behind travel are rock solid. I mean, just take one point alone. In humankind's history, up until last year, a majority of the world's population was considered to be in poverty. And while that's not well known, that changed last year, and there's more disposable income, more people wanting to travel. And a second point, millennials just outpaced baby boomers as the largest demographic cohort. The fundamentals behind the market are there. I think we're going to see some interesting things, though. Let's take business travel as an example. We see a lot of people now perhaps not returning to the office for work. And so mobility of work in Canada might be really interesting if we've got people dispersed in companies across the country. Well, those people need to come back together at certain points to work as teams. So we might see pockets of markets that really fundamentally shift, like business travel in the future. It's going to be fascinating to see, and I know it's going to be a long time before we're back to full recovery, but we will be back to full recovery and more.
Thank you so much, Ross. I think we've run out of time. and this is probably a good place to end. So I just want to thank you all so much. I thought it was a really fruitful, very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanmala, and thank you, Ross, Scott, Marsha, and Beth. I'm sure I, like many in our audience, are looking forward to a lot of the things you're talking about, making us more comfortable with travel. I know I personally, I am missing traveling, and, all these ideas around incentives and, the safe travel stamp and, the rapid testing and the contact tracing, happening in a very, in a way that we're all comfortable with, because all of this right now is very complicated for everybody. And, some interesting conversations around how the work is transforming. And I think the more you can help us all to get that messaging out there so that we really are clear, the better. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And we're looking forward to hearing lots more positive news. And we're looking forward to being able to travel to the Eastern bubble soon and making Toronto a place where people aren't afraid to go to because our numbers are rising. So anyways, thanks again. And Vanmala, thanks. You did a terrific job with moderating this panel. We at the Empire Club are working very hard and bringing very important topics to you. And I urge you to, watch for the emails that'll be coming over the next few weeks where we'll be announcing some of our events. I now adjourn this meeting. So thank you all.